Hello and welcome to the Manchester is Red podcast. My name is Steven Railston and we're recording on a Friday afternoon, just an hour or so after Eric Ten Hag's press conference at Carrington. And I'm joined today just by one colleague, by Samuel Luckhurst, who's along with me for the ride. Tyrone's not here, Rich isn't here today, they're both out and about and busy doing things. But Samuel, we have the task of dissecting the week's news and looking ahead to the weekend's game against Bournemouth, so I'm sure we're going to have a fun-filled 45 minutes.
We'll do our utmost. Absolutely.
Exactly.
Yeah, I'm very well, thank you. Not bad at all.
Very good to hear.
I need an ask with you, Stephen, after last night's result for the mighty two.
Well, not just Thursday night, Samuel. A fantastic week of football all round. I'm sure everyone will agree. The playoff semi-finals with Luton was a wonderful game.
Sheffield Wednesday last night in particular.
Well,
wow.
Yeah, you can give a mention to that as well, can't you? George Smith on our desk, who supports Sheffield Wednesday, he was at the game last night, and I'm sure he had a night to remember because 4-0 down to come and win the game in penalties. Unbelievable. But anyways, we'll unpack the week's news, bit of transfer chat, a bit of takeover chat, and then we'll look ahead to Bournemouth on Saturday afternoon. Obviously, another 3 p.m. kickoff down on the south coast. Another trip, Samuel, for you down the south coast.
I know.
You didn't get a tan at Brighton, did you?
No, and I didn't really get a tan when I went to London and walked. I did a fair amount of walking in London during my visit to the embassy ahead of the pre-season tour on Wednesday, which was a very early start. But it's still, London's looking pretty resplendent at the moment since the coronation, and it seemed like every tourist I walked past had an American accent as well. So the tourism industry in the capital is certainly booming again, and. Yeah, United have played all their games there, but they're going deepest south this week. We used to call it Bournemouth, Southampton, the Peach Derby after Simon Peach, which he took great exception to. And in fairness, Bournemouth is still a fair old way further south than Southampton.
Well, if you've encountered many American tourists in London, that'll get used to for the prepared anyways for this summer tour. Obviously, that's coming up, a trip to Oslo, Edinburgh, and then America, which you and Ty are embarking on.
And Dublin as well, I think.
Dublin as well.
There's a lot. Yeah, we can touch upon that if need be. But it seems like they're ticking all the boxes in terms of the main fan territories, apart from Asia, in that there's going to be a game in Oslo. It seems, I think that's the 12th or the 13th of July. I think somebody had told me the opposition, but I can't quite remember now. And they are looking at Dublin for when they come back in the week before the season begins, because it looks like Ten Hag wants another double header weekend, as we had last season when you and I attended the Vallecano game on the Sunday at Old Trafford, and Rich was in Oslo for the Atletico Madrid game the day before. So Ten Hag wants as many players playing, getting fulfilling minutes the week before the season starts. So it's not a bad idea at all. But it's bad from our perspective because there's quite a lot of travel there. But I suspect you'll be either going to Oslo or going to Edinburgh or going to Dublin, possibly two or three of them anyway, Stephen.
I'm keeping my fingers crossed for Oslo. I had a chat with our editor on the desk. I'm keeping my fingers crossed for that one. But we'll start off with a bit of takeover chat, Samuel. We're just chatting before we went on air and we said, look, we'll kind of make it quick because nothing really has developed, and I guess that's kind of a story in itself. We got told this earlier this week on Wednesday or late Tuesday night that Sheikh Jassim of Qatar has made an improved bid for the club, thought to be around 5.5 billion. So you just want to briefly expand on that, Samuel, and what you were told, obviously, and then we'll discuss the kind of the ramifications, really, because this takeover process is just dragging on into the summer.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I can expand it too much from what's already been written, but as plenty reported midweek. I think the story came out on Tuesday night, and I was off. And if I'm certainly not going to be rushing to file a takeover story at that time of the night on a day off. It seems like there's a takeover story every day or every other day at the moment. But Sheikh Hassim's offer, it remains 100% purchase of the club, would clear all the debt. Includes a separate fund directed solely at the club and the community. And I think when we write or talk about Old Trafford and the stadium, I think it's becoming, it's going beyond that now. Like the area of Trafford, I think there would be keen interest in whoever were to take over United, if indeed a takeover does happen. I think there would certainly be interest from the Trafford Council to see what are you going to do for our area, because there is a lot of space around there. There is potential to create more around there and bring more tourists more Mancunians that way, because of course it's not. If people have been to Manchester, they will realise that Old Trafford is a bit of not a fairway, but it is quite removed from the city centre. I remember when I went to the cricket with a few friends last year who'd come up from London, and we were getting a cab to Old Trafford Cricket Ground, which of course is along the road from the football stadium, and they were struck by how far away it was from the city centre. They were quite familiar with Manchester city centre, but obviously, you know, the two, the football ground and the cricket ground are in Trafford. So that would have to be a conversation. And I mean, talk of the stadium, I did a piece on it, I think, was it last month or late March, about what could happen, certain preferences, what might not happen, what people would like, what people would not like, and the group that have been hired to look into it and have been privy to those discussions, they're on hold at the moment, and they're not so much on tenterhooks, but I suppose one or two employees are, because they live near Manchester, or they live in the north, and if there's a huge project like that going on and they get the green light for it, then they can set up shop here, and they've got a pretty settled working life, overseeing and being involved in the expansion, the renovation of Old Trafford. But that's all on hold until we see what happens with this strategic review, as United refer to it in their PR speak. But as I said, there's really not a lot new going on. It's going to be, by the looks of things, it's going to be Sir Jim Ratcliffe, or it's going to be Sheikh Hassim, and that has always felt that was the case. They've been the two most public in different ways candidates to get the keys for United. But of course, there's always this possibility that the Glazer family or members of the Glazer family will stick around and you know, still get their dividends, or still, you know, have some investment in the club. And when I say investment, I don't mean that in the sense of, you know, their heart being in making Manchester United a force again. I think we know that it's not a particularly ambiguous word, investment, to them and their attachment to United. But it's not ideal for everyone concerned. The manager,
I think that's the point, Samuel.
transfer targets. That it's going on still.
In November.
It's been 6 months.
Said it was going to be a process. And I guess when you look at kind of high-profile takeovers, maybe with the exception of Chelsea, I've said this before, in the Premier League, they usually you don't really tend to hear about them.
The Newcastle one went on for eternity, didn't it? You know, you knew that there wasn't going to be anything happening when there were stories with Newcastle.
Yeah, exactly. And if you're getting leaks in, obviously the briefings, and both sides are kind of preaching confidence at the moment about their respective bids. But that kind of concerns me, and it kind of suggests, I think anyways, that we're not near to a resolution, because if we're in the end zone, there'd be non-disclosure agreements signed, and it would be more confidential, and legally you wouldn't be allowed to speak about it. So as well, like 6 months, like we say, we're rumbling on into summer now, and as you've just touched upon there at the end of the answers, transfers. Ten Hag's obviously drawing up targets. He's planning for the next season, his second year at the club. How concerning is it really that there is a degree of uncertainty still around United at the moment? Because Ten Hag knows he's got this current squad and he knows where he needs to improve, but I guess he doesn't know which owners are going to be there next season. And is that not a problem in itself?
Well, that does get touched upon in the embargo section of the press conference. We're recording this at just gone 1:30. The embargo's at 10:30 this evening. And he was asked about it last week as well, I think, when he indicated he was a little bit in the dark as to the funds. So it's, as I said, it's not ideal, because players who are certainly interested or certainly eager to play for Manchester United, they're going to want some clarity as to what that situation is, so that they're not walking in blind, and they're not going to make a mistake as well. They want to know that the club are as driven as they are, and that they can fulfil their aims at United as well. And when you look at the staff and the players and the relative progress that United have made this season, that that's reassuring for those targets in essence. And Ten Hag has said that players are a lot keener to come to United this year than last year, which isn't a surprise whatsoever, because their stock in the transfer market last year was possibly lower than in 2019, where they acknowledged it and they just decided, let's sign British players and target British players, and it didn't go entirely to plan there, and it wasn't entirely justified either. That was always a pretty strange and flawed strategy, and they don't do that anymore now. But for now, I think players are going to keep their powder dry. When you're at this stage with players that are of interest to you, if there's a risk of an auction, and I think this is one of the myths in football, a club might have an asset and they're considering selling him, and they decide, there could be an auction for him. It just does not happen. If I think clubs can see it a mile off. If a player is invested in signing for a certain club, they'll step away, they'll move on to a different target, and so that auction bidding I don't think it even really happens anymore. I'm struggling to think of a great example in recent memory where that has happened. You could maybe look at Cucurella last year, where City had an offer rejected by Brighton. He was desperate to leave, so the clowns at Chelsea decide to bid, what was it, 10 million or 12 million pounds more, and he turns out to be a bit of a dud, and City get by easily enough without an out-and-out left-back for yet another season, and Brighton are having one of their best seasons.
Do you know the scene, sorry Samuel, out of is it the Sunderland show on Netflix, and Stuart Donald's bidding for Will Grigg?
Oh yeah, the Will Grigg.
Don't go above $1 million, Stuart. Don't go above $1 million. He goes, he ends up paying $3 million on transfer deadline day. That's what Chelsea's strategy. Isn't
that there's the meme of it where he says something like, "This club's going to kill me," or have I taken that from a different football-related documentary? But I'm pretty sure there's something. I might have to Google it afterwards, but it's. Yeah, so that doesn't really happen, but obviously United want to be certain that the funds will be there. I'm pretty certain that the funds are there for a striker, which is the priority. Beyond that, new owner or not, they've got to be realistic with the incomings and the outgoings, because there have got to be a lot of outgoings this summer. There certainly need to be, and they want there to be more outgoings than incomings, and I think that is just about doable. But it would help to have clarity, and then once that's out of the road, they can proceed, and things may change for some people at the club, and things may not change for others.
I think supporters are starting to get a bit frustrated anyways with the uncertainty. I'm seeing that on social media, and hopefully a resolution is found sooner rather than later with the takeover. We'll be back for part 2. That's it for part 1. Samuel, will have a bit of transfer chat then to begin with. You wrote the line earlier in the week that Ten Hag's determined to sign a world-class striker and a world-class midfielder in the summer transfer window. Can you just expand on that for anyone who hasn't read the article? And it's probably not a surprise, really, is it? Because we knew he was targeting.
What are they waiting for? How have they not read it?
Exactly.
Why?
Disgrace.
Yeah. But no, in case they didn't miss it, From Ten Hag's perspective, because United are in a stronger position now, and because Champions League qualification is attainable, and although it might be a bit nervy in the run-in, they should still get it. He is keen to move on to a higher tier of targets than last year. Last year, I think everybody could see what they were doing. There was the odd exception with the midfield in that they pursued Frankie de Jong. They had a fee agreed, but of course the insurmountable obstacle was his wage deferral at Barcelona, and it was only after the Brentford game that United abandoned it and decided, look, we need a midfielder. We've been talking to Casemiro, and that's another thing about United. They do talk to numerous targets concurrently, so that if one deal collapses, they've got someone else there who they remain engaged with, and it's not like they just turn to them at the 11th hour, because those players, their negotiation position is a lot is a lot stronger. That said, Casemiro's was pretty strong, given that he got about 300 grand from a week from United as part of his package. But that was the exception, in that he genuinely did want a new challenge. But you look at the other players, there were three from the Eredivisie. Christian Eriksen was known to Ten Hag because he'd trained with Ajax last year as well. I don't think that's going to happen as much this year. And there was that compromise as well in January, in that Wout Weghorst, who I think was born in the same area as Ten Hag in the Netherlands, he's the stopgap striker who comes in as well, because United didn't have any money to spend, so they were never going to go for Cody Gakpo. And if they had somehow financed a deal for Gakpo, it would have completely compromised what they could do in a summer where Ten Hag would like Harry Kane, and Victor Osimhen is also of interest to United, among others. But where United's stock should be higher in the transfer market, Ten Hag sees that as, that's permission for him to to tell the power brokers, look, we need a higher caliber of player rather than potential. And certainly Lisandro Martinez, although he wasn't particularly young when he signed, it was about potential there, because he'd only played in the Netherlands. It was certainly the case with Anthony as well, and also with Tyrell Malacia. The 3 of the 4 fees paid last summer were for players of potential. Casemiro was the only exception there. Eriksen was, of course, a free agent at that point. So that's why Ten Hag wants to aim high, because he knows that if United are to achieve their end goal of winning the title, which that's what it has to be, they need better players. So logically, you would go after better players, and if you can do that, then that's even better. And the chances are they will be able to do that, because they'll have Champions League football to offer. They've got a coach there who is very widely respected and has had a very good first season so far, and could still oversee a very successful run-in. There's clarity over a number of players in their roles as well, and what United want as a squad going forward. So United are not the difficult sell that they were last year, but it's still the profile of the players that Ten Hag really admires. As I said, Kane, Osimhen, De Jong, Bellingham, probably all of them. They are long shots for various reasons.
See, out of that list, obviously, you think I still consider Kane quite attainable. I mean, you've got Levy at Tottenham, but then the other names.
I think if they really want Kane, I think this is the summer where you get him, because of his contract situation, and because Tottenham. I mean, it was so typical of Tottenham earlier in the week when they announced this. There will be a mural to Harry Kane at the final home game of the season, and the way it read, it was like, this is our farewell to Harry Kane, which it may well be, but they obviously want people to recognise it as a celebration of his goal scoring feat. But the way it read, it was like, this guy's on his way, but we need to flock at his feet, because he's been a great player for the club. And I think there has to come a point now. Maybe Kane has learnt his lesson from a couple of years ago, where he did that chat with Gary Neville on his podcast, and then it was it was briefed that he definitely does want out. And because that was seen as an unbecoming way of going about it, and let's face it, him and his brother were humiliated because they thought they were going to get what they wanted, and they didn't get anywhere near to getting that move to Manchester City, because they were dealing with Daniel Levy, and he was only halfway through his 6-year contract. This summer, I suppose Kane is trying to be a lot more respectful, but there will have to come a point where he does push a little bit more. And if that's privately, then so be it. But some of the things he says, he's been saying recently, I think he's just placating supporters there. But you have to take him at face value. I suppose you can't rule anything out with his brother still his agent, because he was the one who decided it was a great idea to agree to a 6-year contract in 2018. And I maintain, you look at the situation Spurs were in at the time, they had a brilliant team, of course, but they'd bottled it again in a second successive FA Cup semi-final against United. They were 1-0 up, they lost 2-1, and that was the point where there was people starting to say, look, this Tottenham team is really good, but they're still not winning anything. So it did seem pretty excessive at the time to agree to a 6-year contract, and he does risk, missing out on things to win in his career. But we'll have to see what happens this summer. I don't see that being, what's going to be resolved sooner, United's ownership or Harry Kane's future. It's a toss of a coin, that one.
To be fair, if he wants to go abroad, I'll not complain, because Alan Shearer's goal scoring record at the top of the Premier League will be protected, because I think inevitably he will break that if he stays in the league. He's very, very close. He's very close. I was looking at that the other year and I was thinking, is he going to do it? And I just feel it's inevitable now, sadly. Samuel, we did a panel actually when you were in, I think it was on Tuesday. It was before you did that transfer line, when me, Tyrone and Liam, we looked at the 3 positions we would prioritise. Now, I guess striker is the obvious one. It goes without saying, and then midfield. But I wrote more specifically a number 6 would be for me. I think Eriksen's started to look a bit maybe lacking of legs in games, and I think if you get a younger midfielder,
he's been subbed. For the piece did for the morning, he's been subbed 21 times in second halves this season. Eriksen.
And he's just turned 31. That doesn't actually surprise you.
Yeah.
So, a player like De Jong would obviously be perfect, but you've just discussed his wage deferral. I was looking a bit into that again, and it's still got 2 years remaining on that. So you'd think that could still be an issue in negotiations this summer. But I'd prioritise obviously striker and number 6, and then for me the third one, if I was restricted to just 3, it would be a goalkeeper. We've talked about David De Gea at length, obviously, on this podcast, and especially in the last few weeks after blunders against Sevilla and against West Ham. And I just feel another season with De Gea, I thought they could have got away with it maybe, and kind of prioritised somewhere else. But I think it's become a bit more of a pressing matter. And I think he'll hold the club back, and Ten Hag's rebuild next season if he stays. So if I flip it around to you and say your 3 priorities, if you have to narrow it down to 3, I presume you'll be in agreement with a striker and a centre midfielder. What would be the third?
I'd probably be in agreement with you on that, even though it's unrealistic, and if there is a goalkeeping addition, it's difficult to see it being a clear standout number 1. And look, we're going quite a way back here, but United have done that before. The summer that, and this, crikey, it was 20 years ago now almost, but when they signed Tim Howard from, I'm not sure if the club even still exists, or maybe they've been rebranded, but I think it was the New Jersey club or something like that in America. They had Fabian Barthez and Roy Carroll on their books, and both of them were international goalkeepers and reasonably experienced. And Howard came in, and nobody really saw him as the standout number 1, but he had a pretty good pre-season, and then he started the competitive season, and that was it. But up until his mistake for the Costinha goal in the, everybody probably remembers it, the Porto game where Mourinho goes charging up the touchline, his breakthrough moment in his managerial career, if you like, even though he'd won the UEFA Cup the previous year. Up until then, Howard was the outright number 1. After that point, even that run into the season, Roy Carroll started the FA Cup semi-final against Arsenal, and then Howard started the final against Millwall. And I can't remember, did Carroll even come on in it? He might have done, just to say, you've played your part and we want you to contribute for it. I can't quite remember that, but I think that might have happened out of fairness. I'm going to look it up now. And then the following season, it was even more even between them. There was too much chopping and changing. There wasn't enough clarity. So it has happened before with United, where they have got a goalkeeper in who has not been an obvious number 1 choice, and then he does become the number 1, but then he reverts to your expectations of him, and then United are chopping and changing, and that went on for best part of 18 months until Edwin van der Sar came in. It's probably fair to say
it's not been a seamless transition from...
Howard did come off in the cup final, Carroll got 6 minutes or so.
Yeah, there was trouble replacing Schmeichel, there was trouble obviously with Van der Sar when De Gea first came in, and it seems like almost a problem that keeps on happening every decade.
And that was the thing with De Gea, I suppose, more relevantly with De Gea. The same year he joined United, Anders Lindegaard joined, and for a period Lindegaard was the first choice goalkeeper. I think it was only when he got injured in the late January of 2012 that De Gea got in the team again, and he had a clear run and he stayed in the team for the rest of the season. But that was only because of injury to Lindegaard. So there have been occasions in quite distant past, but De Gea was part of it, that United will have two goalkeepers and they'll look to chop and change. But I've never ever agreed with that. I mean, England did it years and years ago with, I think, Ray Clements and Peter Shilton, and you thought maybe United were going to do it when they signed Victor Valdez, if De Gea somehow stuck around, when they were desperate for De Gea to stick around as well in 2015. And of course, Valdez is it's easy to forget he ever played for United. But I don't see this summer being the summer where United go and sign an outright number one goalkeeper. I did the story last week, I think, about Bart Verbruggen, the Anderlecht goalie, who's only 20. So if you're bringing him in, you're just it would be a case of getting him warmed up before he gets into the driver's seat possibly. But I agree with you. I don't think that starting next season with De Gea would be the right call. And maybe,
but I can see it happening though.
Maybe Ten Hag.
Yeah,
of course. Everyone can see it happening. Maybe Ten Hag is genuinely intending on giving Dean Henderson a go. And let's face it, because of Henderson's thigh surgery, it's not as much of a foregone conclusion that he's going to be sold or loaned out again in the summer, because I think Ty said it last week. There aren't going to be many goalkeepers in late July or early August in need of a number one goalkeeper. And when you whittle down the clubs that Henderson could join, that's an even narrower field. So there's a chance that he's going to be stuck at United again, but perhaps it will be a blessing and he'll get his turn, his proper turn to take over from De Gea.
I could see Nottingham Forest coming back in from, actually, whether that be a loan or a permanent deal. I know Steve Cooper rates him quite highly from what he says, and he stayed with him while he's recovering from the.
And you'd think Cooper would want that continuity as well,
exactly,
given the amount of player turnover they've had over the last couple of transfer windows.
Which is quite incredible. Is it 20 players or something like that across the season, which is amazing.
At least, I think, yeah.
And fair play, he's managed to keep them up as well by the looks of things. I'll not say too soon. But that point at Chelsea was very important for Forest. Samuel, a bit of news to come out of the club today was obviously Phil Jones was set to leave officially at the end of the season after the expiry of his contract. He obviously joined in 2011 from Blackburn Rovers. He won the Premier League in Ferguson's last season, I should say. He wrote a bit of a classy letter. It was nice to see, an emotional letter. How would you summarise his time at the club, I guess, because obviously the overriding thing is he's just been so unfortunate with injuries, hasn't he? His body's let him down, and I guess the last few years it's been a shame to see, but it's probably been quite remarkable that he's lasted this long. But obviously his time's now coming to an end.
It was almost the never-ending Manchester United career. I mean, 12 years is an extraordinary amount of time, and
longest-serving player in the current squad. Obviously, De Gea's next after Jones.
Yeah, it's a similar time, isn't it, that they joined in the summer of 2011. But when you consider that in 12 years he's played for United, his appearance number, I think it's 229. That tells you how injury prone he's been, and this chronic knee problem. Credit to him, last season he seemed to be fit for the majority of it, but everybody knew his race was run at that point, and he had a sensational start to his United career when they the start of that 2011-12 season, when they beat Tottenham 3-0, annihilated Arsenal 8-2, thrashed Bolton 5-0, and Jones, I think he played most of those games at right back, and he looked a hell of a player, and then he had a stint in midfield later on in that season, looked pretty decent there as well. But the injury started coming that season. I think he missed pretty much the first half of the next season, and obviously you say, oh, he's a Premier League winner, FA Cup winner, Europa League winner, and da-da-da-da-da. I think in the FA Cup run in 2016, I don't think he actually played in any of the games. In the Europa League, I think he played in maybe 2 games and only 1 in the knockout. And in the season that United won the league, most, if not all of his appearances in the league that season were in the second half of the season. And I think United won the league with something like 4 games to spare as well. And I think he probably played in all 4 of those games as well in the run-in. So his contribution to the triumphs while he's been at the club has been minimal, really. You would not look back at any of those wins in the cups or the league and say he was absolutely integral to their success that season. There were maybe one or two games when they last won the league. I remember he did, I think, a man marking job on Marouane Fellaini when United played Everton, and he did quite well. But I mean, that's just going off my almost worthless knowledge of Manchester United that I'm drawing on to try and
should get you on Eggheads
to give him his kudos.
Some quiz show,
yeah,
some specialist quiz
show.
Man United
I think Mastermind. The special subject bit would be a doddle if I did that. I think I'd bank all my points there before getting onto the general knowledge bit and struggling slightly more. So ultimately, that contract he got in February 2019, I remember it was one of those rare occasions as well where they actually handed out the press release. There were hard copies of a press release, hot off the press, and it was a statement. And I remember shaking my head at the time thinking, why have they done this? Because his previous contract ran out in the summer of 2019, and there was an option to extend it for a year until 2020. And even his advisors were amazed that United had approached them and said, we want to negotiate an entirely new contract for Phil Jones, because they thought his deal will be extended and then we'll see how we get on in the summer. And why United didn't do that, I've no idea. If ever that question is answered, there will not be a rational explanation for it. And unfortunately for United, it's the most egregious example of a contract renewal during probably in the club's history.
And that's saying something, considering
Rojo really does run him close. Rojo in March 2018, that was another certifiable decision, but not as... I think that aged terribly at the time. It didn't seem like such a terrible idea because he'd done pretty well under Mourinho, and he'd come back and done okay from his injury. But then he barely played, and I think they tried to sell him in that summer as well. But the Jones one is the most infamous because he should have been released in 2020. They could have released him in 2019, so they literally could have released him 4 years earlier than they're doing so. And I suspect they've only just announced it now because I did the story about players being released earlier in the week, and the club have subsequently confirmed that two of them are being released, Ethan Galbraith being the other.
Wonder if he'll end up playing for Austria then. I wonder if he's got any long-lost Austrian relatives, because Ranić didn't mind playing him, did he, last season? Was it Liverpool?
Oh, Phil Jones.
He did not know.
He was unlucky to come off at half-time against Liverpool. He had a pretty good game against Wolves, but unfortunately, Phil Jones being Phil Jones, I think he still assisted... Was it João Moutinho's winning goal? It might have been. But he was United's best player that evening. And then the Liverpool game, he was made the fall guy for a disastrous first half when he wasn't the worst performer on the pitch. There were probably every other outfield teammate was more of a prime candidate to be taken off in that particular disaster.
One thing I will say before we move on as well, I think it was in late 2021 actually when he did the interview. I think it was with the Times, and he did another with the Guardian last year, basically talking about the mental struggle of being injured, and we discussed it on this podcast, I remember, and the kind of the slack that he's dealt with, and how tough it is going through rehab, and it's obviously very mentally tough. He does get well paid, but the suffering you have to go through football, if your body is really letting you down, and the mental trauma that must cause, he's obviously coming through the end of that, and hopefully he has a good last chapter in his career. So best of luck to Phil Jones.
It was a really good interview with Jonathan Northcroft in the Sunday Times when that came out. I think it was in the September at the start of last season, because he just started playing for the under-21s, and that's the thing about him hanging around at United. You can't pin that on him. He wasn't the one who arranged his own contract for himself. He was the one who was handed that contract. And if Man United decide to give you a 4.5 year contract at the age of, how old would he have been then? He'd have been...
You say, thank you, Ed Woodward. I'll take that. I'll sign.
You say thank you. Yeah, absolutely.
I'll join my remaining years.
Yeah, exactly. So that's not on him. And... yeah, hopefully United have learnt their lesson, but whether Phil Jones actually plays again, I think that's got to be very much in doubt, sadly, for him.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. We'll leave it there for part 2, Samuel. Back in a moment for part 3 for some Bournemouth chat. Now, Samuel, an absolutely thrilling game on Saturday afternoon. We've got Bournemouth, but it is obviously very important because Newcastle got 3 points on Thursday night, which takes them up to 3rd position, and United need 6 points to secure a top 4 finish. They've struggled on the road this season, probably not against teams of Bournemouth's calibre. They've been alright, but against better sides, they've had a tendency to underperform. So I was looking at the kind of the fixtures. You've obviously Chelsea and Fulham remaining. Do you think this game could potentially be the banana skin in that run? Although one side of it says it's Bournemouth and they are safe. They've obviously got their status insured for next season in the top flight. So it could kind of go one of two ways. They could be on the beach and it just doesn't really matter. But the other side of it says, look, it's the crowd are going to be up for it. Probably it's Manchester United coming. They're in the Premier League next season, which has been a resounding success. He's done a great job, O'Neill.
Yeah, it has.
So, how do you think that's going to develop really on Saturday? Is it a banana skin, or is it a game that United should win quite comfortably? Because on paper they should, but Bournemouth might play with a bit of freedom, mightn't they? Now they're safe.
There's an element of jeopardy with all of these final league matches for United, and that with Bournemouth it's the infamous away record. Even though against the bottom 8 teams they've won 6 of them away from home. The one they slipped up with was at West Ham, and they actually started that game quite well until De Gea's howler, and then after that they were dreadful, and West Ham completely deserved to win. Chelsea, it's almost like we're dragging you down with us. If we're not in the Champions League next season, we're going to take you with us. There's the possibility of that, even though Chelsea are dreadful and United should be winning that game. And you look at Fulham and you wonder, will there be an appetite for revenge after Fulham's implosion during the FA Cup game and the Mitrovic suspension? And Mitrovic will play in that game as well, of course. He came back last week and he got a goal, didn't he, in the win at Southampton. But ultimately, United should be getting 6 points at the minimum, which is what they need to qualify for the Champions League from these final 3 games. It feels like there's a core squad that Ten Hag has got to work with now for the remaining 4 matches, provided there are no more setbacks. And unfortunately for them, they've had one already. Rashford has reported ill today, and it's uncertain whether he'll actually travel to Bournemouth. The team are due to fly there today, so maybe we'll have some clarification and people will know whether he has gone or not by the time they've listened to this. But I think it was about 27 players trained in midweek, which is an ample amount to cover a full-sided training game. McTominay was back, which was well-timed, especially as Sabitza's out for the season. Rashford was back as well, and it's not like this illness. If it keeps him out against Bournemouth, you expect him to be back for the games next week. And Ten Hag really needs some consistency now, because although you look at McTominay and you don't see him as someone who's necessarily going to start in any of these games coming up. Maybe the Fulham one, if United have already qualified for the Champions League. But his robustness and his physique and his stamina is going to be important in certain games. And mainly, you've got the FA Cup final on the mind as well. And it's been impossible since City wiped the floor off Real Madrid on Wednesday night not to look ahead to the FA Cup final, even though United have got some really important games in the league coming up, and they need to secure Champions League qualification, which I'm sure some of the suits at the club who sit in the boardroom, they will view that if they absolutely had to choose, they would take getting into the Champions League next season over winning the first All Manchester FA Cup final. But Bournemouth have done very well. They've tailed off in their last couple of games, but by looking at the highlights of the Chelsea game, they seem pretty unfortunate to lose that. It seemed that Chelsea had a couple of slices of luck and certainly rode their luck to win that 3-1. By the time of the Palace game last week, Bournemouth knew they were safe, so you relax automatically, and we saw it with Wolves and their performance at United. Even though that game wasn't done until the 94th minute with Garnacho's goal. That was more down to the fact that United were profligate again, and they must have one of the worst shot conversion rates in the league, the amount of chances they have in games. But I suppose it was a belated takeaway from the Wolves game. But thinking about it more now was that United actually got a lot stronger as that game went on, and you haven't seen that from them, and you certainly didn't see it in the defeats at West Ham and Brighton, where they became more and more fatigued the longer the game went on. Whereas at Wolves, the substitutions helped. There was a freshness about them. Garnacho comes back into the team. He gets his goal as well. So United are they're in a much better state now for these weekend matches than they were 2 or 3 weeks ago. And although it would have been great for them to have got to another European final, and they won't publicly admit it, privately they must be pretty pleased that they've not had to just negotiate a 2-legged European semi-final with Juventus ahead of potentially what would have been a final against Jose Mourinho's Roma, which would have interrupted FA Cup final week. I mean, those 3 games, not having those 3 games, that United need to ensure that they capitalise on that, and they maximise these 3 midweeks.
It's one less game, but it would have been a fantastic final, wouldn't it, with Mourinho coming back and another.
Would have been a lot of work as well. Yeah,
it would have been. So you're probably thankful for that. But no, he's done a great job, Mourinho. Back-to-back finals, Conference League, and obviously. I
like what he's doing. He's back in his mode of his first season at United, where he just looks at the league and he thinks, F this. We're not bothering with the league. Let's put it all in on the Europa League, and if we win that, then that's a truly great season. Did you see the statistics
from the game?
It was a very on-brand second leg semi-final performance from a Mourinho team. Yeah,
75% possession for Leverkusen. All the shots. I don't think Roma had a shot on target. Maybe they had one. But still,
the man can mix it up. He can mix it up, can't he?
Outstanding.
Yeah.
Changes for Bournemouth then, Samuel. For my panel, I've already submitted it. I'd obviously, if he's fit, providing he's fit, I'd have Rashford back. At the expense of Jadon Sancho on the left, Martial and Anthony for the remainder of the attacking players. And I'd also keep the team the same with the exception of Dalot. I'd probably bring him into defence. I know we've talked about it a lot as well, the kind of chopping and changing between the 2 right backs. But as I said, lads, it's Bournemouth. You can have a full back of a bit more attacking quality, and I think Dalot obviously brings that to the side. So, were you gonna make any changes from that Wolves win? Because it was, as you said, it was very comfortable in the end, wasn't it?
If Rashford is fit enough to play, then you play him, and I can't see Sancho starting. I don't think he should start. If Rashford if Rashford doesn't even travel, I wouldn't start Sancho. I'd be bringing Garnacho into the team, and
yeah, I agree with that.
I think Marshall. I think Marshall is kept just going off his. He got a goal last week. He didn't do much else. He should have been played in early on by Anthony when he had his first shot, and it was on to put Marshall in for a one-on-one. But you've got to. I think it would be prudent to try and seize on the fact that Marshall has scored and see if he can keep that up. He's got experience of playing at Bournemouth as well, and sometimes that can be overestimated. Sometimes it can be useful. But I think I agree with you what you said about being more front-footed with Dalot coming in. I'd go along with that. And the only other change would be what happens with the left wing. If Rashford is fit, start Rashford. If he doesn't travel, then I'd go with Garnacho. That must be a frustration for Ten Hag that he's got, including Marshall as well. Even though Marshall doesn't play on the left very often at all these days, but those 3 players, Martial, Sancho, and Garnacho, they've all been better off the bench this season. I think last week Marshall's goal, it was only the 3rd goal in 15 starts for United this season, and with Garnacho, that's completely forgivable because he's only 18, and this has been he's had a tremendous 18 months, and he's had a tremendous season as well. The development, the rate of his development, and it really, I think we've spoke before about quality and character. What I like about him is that a lot of wingers in that age group at United, they'd have had a look at the first team and seen Rashford and seen Sancho, and when he was available, they'd have seen Greenwood. They'd have seen Marshall, another winger, and then in the summer they signed Anthony for 85.5 million, and they'd have been ground down by that. But Garnacho is completely unfazed by it. He wants to take his chance. He wants to make his name in the United team, and Sancho is pretty much at the back of the queue now for the left winger's role, and Garnacho is doing his utmost to nail down a first team spot. And there are a couple of really good challenges for him now that he's got his new contract. It's about performing as a starter, and if you perform as a starter, you remain a starter in the side. So if Rashford doesn't travel, I'd be excited to see, and I'd hope from a purely professional perspective that it's Garnacho who's starting, because he gets fans off their seats. You hear the seats at Old Trafford clattering whenever he gets on the ball. He's a Man United winger in the truest sense, and you hope for his sake and United's sake he doesn't fall the way of Januzaj, because there are some very obvious parallels there between the two of them. I think Garnacho is maybe a more complete player, and he's got a more stable environment to work in, but he's still got to keep his feet on the ground, and he certainly knows his worth, but he's backed it up pretty well so far this season.
Well, I mean, it's this time last year, probably around this day, actually, maybe a week before. It was just the FA Youth Cup final, against Nottingham Forest.
Yeah, it was.
And we obviously went to a few of those games. He was talismanic. He almost kind of had this aura around him, playing for the under 18s, and he's kind of just made that transition to the first team quite flawlessly, actually. It's been so impressive. And you're right, like, he does have that aura, doesn't he? Obviously, he has got that confidence, and that's quite endearing, actually. Obviously, he believes in his own ability, and he's backing it up at the moment. To come into that team at 18 years old and to perform so well, it's fantastic to see. And obviously this year would only be his under 21 year, usually, with normal progression, which is obviously worth noting. We'll leave it there. Samuel, are you down on train or car tomorrow?
No, I believe it's...
is it the private jet?
It's myself and Ty. Yeah, not the private jet. Do you know what? Some colleagues are actually looking at flying down to London for the cup final due to the rail strike kerfuffle there. I think kerfuffle's putting it mildly. I can't repeat what a colleague said when a colleague had actually booked their train down on the Friday, and then of course yesterday's news that there was going to be a strike on the Friday as well. They weren't aware of that until someone informed them today, and I can't repeat what they said in the Carrington press room. But some are genuinely looking at maybe flying down to London for the FA Cup final due to
for the Carabao Cup final. I had friends obviously that were going down, and I think the train prices were extortionate. They ended up driving up to Edinburgh and flying from Edinburgh, and it was dirt cheap. It's absurd. How can a flight be cheaper for Edinburgh to London than a train from Newcastle to London? It's a strange world we're living in.
It is. But myself and Ty are driving down in the same vehicle tomorrow.
Well, I was going to say
it'll be a long day, but at least we'll have company.
Samuel. I did offer last time. Was it your trip to Spain? I can't remember who it was against. I think it was the first.
I think Ty, when Ty was saying how are you getting down to Bournemouth, I think we were both like, do we have to do this really? But this is the job. You put in a lot of miles, and as you will know, I think with a couple of pre-season games, I'd imagine as well. Even pre-season games, they can be taxing.
To make it even better though, Samuel, we've got another trip to Bournemouth next season because they'll be back.
I know, yeah, we're all absolutely delighted. Delighted that they stayed up and that Leeds are going down and Leicester might go down and Forest could go down. These easy trips that are just to the Midlands or to Yorkshire, and unfortunately we've not had a great deal of luck, and we can't be too harsh about Southampton with Simon Peach being such a
can't kick a man when he's
such an amiable colleague. I know, exactly.
Thank you very much for your time, Samuel.
Thank you, Stephen. Appreciate it.
A pleasure as always, and thanks to listeners. Head across to the YouTube channel. We're taking over nicely with subscribers at the moment, and as usual, check out the Spotify, Apple, and all the other good audio platforms to hear the podcast, and extra bit of content from Eric Ten Hag's press conferences will also be uploaded over there. Thank you very much, and have a great weekend. Take care.